The main purpose of this within-subject study was to determine whether the implementation of gamification features within an employee recognition platform affected employee engagement. Our hypothesis H1 states that gamification in a corporate setting has an impact on employee engagement. Thus, and as discussed, our dependent variable is employee engagement, measured via fully structured employee engagement surveys at critical points in our study. Our independent variable is the gamification element in the form of badges and is introduced into a corporate employee recognition program. The participants in our study, sampled via convenience, represented the population of the organization. The group was comprised of 160 total participants, 72 women and 88 men. The mean age was 31 years old and the age range was 20 to 45. To examine our hypothesis, we conducted a two-phase study that assessed employee engagement at three important points: at the start of the experiment, T sub 0, upon conclusion of a control period and before the introduction of the gamification feature, T sub 1, and upon conclusion of the experimental period, T sub 2. Consistent with industry standards measuring employee engagement, our surveys utilized a Likert scale point system ranging from 1 to 6, strongly disagree to strongly agree. The dependent variable was derived from the means of 15 6-point Likert scale items and assessed via three fully structured employee engagement surveys assessed at each of the 3 points in time discussed previously. Ratings can vary from population to population, but it's not atypical to see a small number of 6s. A score of 6, i.e. highly engaged, requires a participant to report strongly agree on at least 8 and agree on at least 7 questions. Depending on the organization, this may not be feasible, as is the case with our data set, which was derived from an actual unidentified organization. Our independent variable, the gamification element, is implied by its binary on-off state and was introduced upon conclusion of the control time frame and upon commencement of the experimental time frame. The data in the table shown provides a baseline understanding of the levels of employee engagement at each of the time frames in our study. Note that because the employee engagement score is an average of the 15 6-point questions, the highest ranking engagement level washed out of the data for this study. An ANOVA repeated measures analysis regarding overall employee engagement showed that there was a statistically significant difference in overall employee engagement scores within the three surveys. While this test cannot ascertain where any significance lies, it is less prone to type 1 errors and was used to eliminate that possibility. The primary focus of the study was to assess the impact of the gamification element on employee engagement. However, to ensure accurate interpretation of the data, we analyzed the impact of the recognition program as well as the gamification element itself on employee engagement. Paired samples t-tests were run to assess the effects at times T sub 0, T sub 1, and T sub 2 in the combinations presented here. A paired samples t-test was run to assess the impact of employee recognition program on employee engagement. Results showed that there was not a statistically significant difference between the control engagement scores and the engagement scores assessed upon conclusion of T sub 1. A paired samples t-test was run to assess the effect of the gamification feature on employee engagement scores within the corporate employee recognition program. Results showed that there was a statistically significant difference between the pre-gamification engagement and the employee engagement upon conclusion of the gamification timeframe. A paired samples t-test was run to assess the overall effect of the employee recognition program, including the badge gamification feature on employee engagement. Results showed that there was a statistically significant difference between the pre-test engagement and the final engagement study. This plot demonstrates the drops in employee engagement as identified in the aforementioned t-test. As expected, the plot demonstrates a minor drop in engagement between T sub 0 and T sub 1 and a statistically significant drop in engagement between T sub 1 and T sub 2, and of course between T sub 0 and T sub 2. In addition to the discoveries noted above, we identified and explored the differences in employee engagement based on participant demographics including age and gender. With respect to age, while our analysis reveals some variation among age groups, the measures across every age group in the organization remained consistent. Worth noting, however, the overall mean engagement across all three surveys for employees aged 35 to 39 was highest, and ages 40 to 44 was the lowest. All employees displayed a decrease in overall engagement as the experiment progressed, especially as the gamification element was introduced. However, men indicated the most dramatic drop in overall engagement across all three measures. Okay, now I'll turn it over to John, who will go over the discussion and the conclusion of our research. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Nicole. The purpose of the study was to examine the effect gamification elements, in this case badges, have on employee engagement when implemented with an official recognition program. The results of the paired test analyses in the previous slides indicate statistically significant results with a great enough degree in support of our primary hypothesis, indicating that the gamification element has a negative impact on employee engagement. Since the relevant differences were observed only once the gamification badges were introduced, we were able to rule out the recognition program as the cause of the drop in engagement. Previous research suggests that gamification has a positive impact on user engagement in a software system setting. An example of such evidence is discussed in Homari's Do Badges Increase User Activity?, a field experiment on the effects of gamification. This publication reports the results of a 2-year field experiment in which the authors seek to determine whether the use of gamification features increases user engagement in a non-gaming context. During this 2-year experiment, the authors tracked the actions of users within a live software system, ShareTribe, for a calendar year before and a calendar year after the introduction of badges. The result of the study indicated that there is a positive correlation between gamification and increased user engagement. In contrast, previous research also denounces the benefits of gamification. An example is the Kayuski et al. Experimental field study, To Gamify or Not to Gamify, an experimental field study of the influence of badges on motivation, activity, and performance in an online learning course. In recognizing the importance of student engagement in a learning environment, the authors conducted a 16-week field study to determine whether the use of gamification elements such as badges had an impact on student motivation. The authors found no significant evidence that supported the hypothesis that the badge system would increase student motivation. This is an important area of study because previous research has called into question the efficacy of gamification efforts. Such efforts have been accused of actually undermining intrinsic motivation and may have unintended consequences. By limiting our study on a single aspect of gamification, badges, we are attempting to isolate the effects of one particular gamification element. Furthermore, this is the first study of its kind that attempts to correlate the effects of gamification on employee engagement, which is a metric more closely tied to job satisfaction. This study does have some limitations to consider. First of all, sampling was performed via convenience, as all participants were a part of the organization available at the time of this study. Future studies may benefit from random sampling and the assignment of participants to subgroups that align with each of the timeframes studied herein. Experiments performed with each group will run concurrently and span the total time of the study. For example, and as illustrated here, Group 1 may be assigned to the Barebones Slack user group, Group 2 to the Slack Employee Recognition System only, and Group 3 to the Slack Recognition System plus badge-based gamification. Further exploration is also necessary to discover the cause of change in engagement between genders. While we found our results to be intriguing, we didn't have the data necessary to deduce the reason for the more drastic drop in overall engagement among males. In conclusion, it has been argued that gamification in a corporate setting may increase employee engagement. We collected and analyzed data from employee engagement surveys to determine the impact that gamification has on employee engagement. Our study is unique in that it merges the research sensibilities of HCI industry best practices with that of HR industry best practices to examine the contraindication of employee engagement and gamification elements. Based on the results of our study, the general conclusion is that the implementation of gamification features in the format of badges within an official corporate employee recognition platform has a negative influence on employee engagement. The significance of our findings suggests that future study is worthwhile. Suggested areas to consider include the types of badges and level up systems that are offered, badges with corporate endorsement and recognition such as pay, day off, and more. Furthermore, use of gamification in a non-mandatory or unofficial setting may be an intriguing avenue of inquiry. Thank you for your time. On behalf of Team Gray, we hope you enjoyed our presentation.